All right, Kyle, let's turn our attention to the Auburn defense and look at the defensive front. So we know that during Gus Malzahn's better days, his better teams, that defensive front, even through some of those lesser 7 and 8 win seasons, that the defensive front was typically a top 5 unit in the country.
Yep.
Not so last year. Not remarkable performance, a bit lackluster there. Justin Rogers moves on to the NFL. And Marcus Harris is probably the most productive player coming back.
Yeah, really excited for Marcus and the way he ended his season and what he potentially can do in the NFL coming up. So just wanted to give him a shout out since you mentioned him. But the question here with this group is how good will they be? Or can they be? However you want to phrase that, because you are losing the best parts of your defensive line to the draft, transfer, otherwise. And there's a lot of unknowns with this group. The three people that I focus on here, if we talk about the three main areas of Auburn's defensive front, the defensive end, defensive tackle, and the buck position, as they're calling it now. I think they called it the jack under the previous regime or the previous defensive coordinator. Defensive end, Keldrick Falk. That's your big name. He came in and earned playing time right away as a freshman, and he looked the part. He's one of those guys that comes out of high school level, and his tape is accurate to what he could potentially do at the college level. I would say at defensive tackle, senior leader Jason Jones coming back for another year is crucial to the interior of that defensive line and making it secure and living up to its potential. I would then say also for your buck position, the most exciting name that people got acquainted with last year as a transfer, Jalen McLeod. And you saw that he could really get after the quarterback. And so I think if these three guys all rise to the occasion, that's a big theme you're kind of hearing through these discussions with these group, like we expect them to be, that's going to really give some good leadership at all three of those aspects of the defensive front. And then if you look at, you brought in Trill Carter, Gage Keys as transfers this year to provide some depth, but also the newcomers. There's a lot of hype around Amaris Williams, Malik Blockton, Javonte Waller, and Joe Phillips, those last two will probably be playing the buck position. How good can they be? That's the question. I don't know, but I'm at least hopeful for that core group I discussed at the front end, those three guys at those three positions.
Kyle Loomis is here breaking down the Auburn Tigers, both sides of the ball. So please check out both the offense and the defense. We'll talk a little special teams possibly. And of course, a new defensive coordinator in DJ Durkin, a new of sorts linebacker coach in Josh Aldridge, the new and the old there. With him coming back, I see that Eugene Asante, the leading tackler from last year, he's back, although Cam Riley, a big loss as a 3-year starter.
Yes, Cam Riley leaving definitely hurts the depth here, but I'm very excited about this group. We haven't talked about the linebackers as a strength for a while. Not that they were a detriment, but as the strength of this group. And a lot of times they're known as the quarterbacks of the defense. So to know that Eugene Asante, who is your defensive leader this year, we could talk about that with a defensive back group last year being the leaders, and you would have had a very strong case for that. But I think this is where your leaders are, and this is where the exciting part of your defense is going to come from, especially when you talk about DJ Durkin coming in, even with Josh Aldridge moving to that spot as a linebacker coach, which he's done before as well. The names Eugene Asante and Austin Keys both had some injury issues on and off, especially Austin Keys. He was able to get back. They're very likable guys. They're very charismatic. You can understand why they're great leaders on the defense and just for the team as a whole. So those two guys I'm super excited about. I'll also give you Wesley Steiner, who's been around for a little bit. He definitely hasn't, at least by most people's standards, made the best use of his time here, but he's definitely going to provide you some solid depth as a linebacker. And then DeMarcus Reddick, who is part of this new freshman class. I think in the hype of the wide receiver group, people were forgetting how good the linebacker freshman class seems on paper. DeMarcus Reddick, DJ Barber are the names that are already on campus. You could have thrown Joe Phillips, who's a buck for Auburn now, into that category as well. So I like the linebacker group. I find very little to be worried about there. I think we're pretty solid.
And then, Kyle, looking at the secondary, several transfers there, but the one that really stands out is obviously the experience and the production of a Jaron Thompson at Texas, where he had 176 tackles in his career, and that career is going to continue. But at Auburn,
Yep. I think the story here for defensive backs is who's going to replace all that talent. And you're talking about Jaron Thompson, Antonio Kite from Alabama, which you don't see Alabama to Auburn swaps a whole lot even in the transfer portal. So that's an interesting story there. And of course, Alabama fans will tell you they didn't want him. He wasn't going to produce anything. Texas fans will say the same thing about Jaron Thompson. They're definitely being brought in to shore up this group that just lost every bit of the talent that they had there. And that's not to say that the talent here isn't ready, but you definitely needed some experience at least to come in and be able to secure this transition period. Names like Kayan Lee, who started to rise up last year, that's one to pay attention to at cornerback. I'd also say people know Keontae Scott pretty well. That's definitely one that's going to be a leader of sorts in this group, securing it with those transfers coming in Kite and Jaron Thompson. I'd also say the question for me becomes who is going to be the star position for Auburn. Champ Anthony is a name that people pay attention to. Also, who will fill those safety roles? I think that's the biggest question, is whether it's one of the transfers, somebody that's already been here. There's a lot of names at the safety position that just haven't, I keep overusing this phrase, but risen to the occasion quite yet. And this is the year that you got to do it because everybody is basically available for playing time, losing so much talent as they did.
I'm going to edit right there just because I want to check. Are you prepared to say anything about special teams, or should we just skip?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kyle Loomis here, breaking things down on the Auburn side. Of course, you can catch Kyle on a regular basis. E2C Network is the place to be right here on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget about special teams. You've got a punter and kicker. You got return units, coverage units. How has that looked last season going into this year? And are you pretty hopeful that a lot of games are lost on special teams, that's going to be an airtight group across the board?
I think this is an airtight group. You said it best. I really am excited about, and when we think of special teams, we mainly think about the punters and the kickers. The return units, the coverage units are definitely all part of that. And that's where you see a lot of the young talent get their first looks on a team, especially some of these athlete positions get their opportunities, especially on kick coverage. So we don't really have to dive into that as much, but let me give you what everybody wants to hear, and that's the kickers. First of all, Alex McPherson. I get him and his brother confused, even though he's been in the NFL for a while now. He is about as solid of a kicker as we've had in quite some time. And Auburn's had some great kickers over the last several years, just a lineage with the Carlsons going back to Cody Parkey. I'm forgetting somebody, but if I'm correct, Alec McPherson was 100% on the year last year. And that seems to be forgotten. If he missed any, he missed like one. And that was incredible to see that people weren't making a bigger deal out of that in a year where Auburn really needed to lean on special teams and getting some points from there. He was a pretty solid guy to go to for points. So excited about his return. Also at the punter position, guy who's been here forever, the Wanda from down under, Oscar Chapman, and he is just one of your biggest defensive weapons. When we talked about defensive questions and things like that, you want to know that you've got a good punter to put a defense that maybe has some questions in the best possible position, and he's going to do it. If he is not in the running for the Ray Guy Award this year, there's something wrong with our system. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw that prediction out right there. I also want to give you the name Towns Magoo or Mago, I can forget which way it's pronounced. He's coming in as a kicker, and a lot of people were confused by this because McPherson, I believe, has 2 years of eligibility left. You don't usually see them pick up another one that quickly. So what's going on there? He's a rare talent. You kind of take him when you can. Right kid right outside of Auburn at Auburn High. But I'm wondering if we're not going to see him potentially see some punting time as well, or at least kickoffs, because Oscar Chapman, this is supposedly his last year, if I've got his timeline correct. And I wonder if we won't see him fill in some time at punter too, until McPherson decides that he's ready to go off to the NFL. And if you talk about returners, just to kind of round out, I think you'll see Keontae Scott as a great athlete at defensive back as one of those returners back there. Some of your running backs too will be your kick returners. That's kind of how I would break down the special teams overall.
Yeah, Keontae Scott brought one all the way back to the house last year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
We
yes, McPherson, just to check you on that one, Kyle, you are perfect, as is Kyle McPherson, as is Alex McPherson at 13 for 13. There you go.
Well, if you want to, you almost had a Freudian slip there to say I was perfect. I was a kicker and I was 100% in my high school time, 1 for 1. So, if you want to give me credit there, I'll take it.
Well, the pressure was on because otherwise you'd have to tell us about your high school career being 0%, 0 for 1.
Yes.
So it all
It,
rode on that one kick.
it all rode on it, and boy, did I make it count. So
Yeah,
I
your
live off
football
that glory.
legacy. Yep, on one kick, and you came through in the clutch. So I'm impressed there, Kyle.
I appreciate that.
E2C Network, everyone, and we appreciate Kyle stopping by. And before we let you go, Kyle, anything that's stood out from camp? I know that I looked at the dates today. April 6th, Auburn
Yep.
is one of the first teams to get out on the field for the spring game. So so since they have been at it for several weeks now, is anything really come out that of note?
It depends on who you talk to. I think there is a desire to have a strong competition at quarterback. I think some fans want there to be one there more than there might be. Let me be very clear. Every position, as every coach says, is open every single year, and they have to go out there and earn it. But the conventional wisdom and thought process is as expected. Peyton Thorne is separating himself from the group as you would expect with a guy of his experience. I think that's got some Auburn fans a little in their feelings and not able to process things fully with what that actually means. Walker White, obviously, a lot of people are excited about him. I am as well. People often forget that Holden Gariner is still there. I think the lack of information, excitement for the spring practice right now is because there hasn't been, at least perception wise, more of a emphasis and a more of a open, I don't know how you say this, more attention around the quarterback race is probably what more people want. It doesn't seem like it's going to be at this point much of a race. Also, and we mentioned him in wide receivers. Every time we get a look at Cam Coleman out in there in the field, it's just he looks every bit of the part. And I think that's what got most people excited right now. But I would say the focus for people this year is getting out there on the field for the spring game on April 6th and really actually getting a good look at this team this year, because last year was really tainted with some bad weather. It looks like there may be some of that in the forecast this year, and you really couldn't take any hardcore analysis away from spring as much as you can during a glorified scrimmage game. But I think that's really the focus this year, is just getting a first look at this team and everybody just kind of seeing how everybody's running out there.
All right, Kyle, appreciate you stopping by as always, sir.
Appreciate you. Thank you for having me.